Good afternoon, everyone. We're live on Thrive Talks. We'll just wait a minute and let everyone in. But Shailesh, how are you? I'll introduce you in 30 seconds when we have people in. But how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well. Thank you very much.
You can say as long as we are safe and all our people around us are safe these days, it's all good. So all
I
fine.
know. I know.
Strange
So
times.
we have very strange times and keep getting stranger. Just as you feel like you're over one hump, like something else comes up and constantly extreme agility is what I call it.
Seriously.
Okay, let's get started. Everyone, thank you so much for logging into Thrive Talks. Welcome. Just as a way of introduction, I'm Shreyasi Singh, one of the founders of Harappa and the company CEO. And Harappa, as I hope many of you who are joining in know, we're an online learning institution and we focus on cognitive, social, and behavioral skills, or what we call Thrive skills, and therefore Thrive Talks. Thrive skills that are critical for individuals, teams, and organizations to flourish and succeed come what may. We began Thrive Talks as sort of a dialogue with India's leading talent custodians, because I feel like it's the one thing the pandemic has done for sure. It has disrupted the way we work, the way companies function more than anything else. We're still trying to decode and understand, and talent leaders and talent custodians are up front and center in everything that has happened over the last 18-20 months, and I don't think we've seen the back of it over the next couple of years as well, the ramifications and consequences and the changes we need to make because of what we've all lived through and are continuing to live through. I think talent leaders will have a huge role in shaping that. So it's been very exciting for us to have conversations with talent leaders. Today, I'm delighted to have Shailesh Deshpande, who's the Vice President and Head of Talent and Leadership Development at the Godrej Group with us. Thank you, Shailesh, and welcome to Thrive Talks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Great. And Shailesh obviously has played very critical business-related HR roles, of course, in his current role and mandate at the Godrej Group, obviously one of India's largest companies, but also at sort of, I think he's worked at all the coolest companies and the most preferred employers in the country, whether it's Marico, Asian Paints, Accenture, and now obviously with Godrej. So has a wealth of more than 2 decades of experience and has a genuine personal interest in psychology-based approach to leadership. And I think if that's the one science the world needs now is for all of us to understand our minds and our heart more. I keep saying cognitive sciences and psychology is really the things to study. So excellent to have you with us, Shailesh. How Thrive Talks work for everyone who's joining us for the first time is it for the next 55 odd minutes, we focus on 3 themes. We spend around 15 minutes on each theme and take audience question at the end of each theme. So please put your questions on the Q&A or chat. We've also already received questions from the audience as they were registering, and we'll be putting those up as well. And we'll take questions from there. The 3 themes for today are the psychological impact, given Shailesh's interest in psychology, psychological impact of hybrid and virtual work. That's theme 1, and we spent 15 minutes of that to begin with. Theme 2, which I'm really excited about diving into, is power structures and how hybrid has changed power structures. And third, again, how HR policies, as we're calling them, are changing from being standardized to being personalized as we're becoming more, companies become more employee centric and don't have universal policies as such. So a lot of rich, several rich themes. So let's dive right in, Shailesh, on the psychological impact of hybrid and virtual work, right? And you and I were having this conversation earlier as well. And, you said something that really stuck with me. At the deepest level, really, we all have 2 needs, right? And, at the core psychology of a human being, there's a need for self-definition and also there's a need for achievement. How was this achieved at the workplace? Now, we'll focus our conversation at the workplace. How are these 2 needs of self-definition and achievement manifested at the workplace before the pandemic? And how have you seen these 2 deep psychological needs now change at the workplace as we are living through the pandemic right now?
Sure. Well, thanks for that question. And before I kind of try and reflect on that, I thought a few things I would like to say. I really like the word you used, talent custodians. As a HR professional, I think the only question that we all keep asking ourselves is, are we truly doing our job of doing what is right for our people and for our businesses? And I really like the word custodian. And I hope that every day I try to, do justice to that phrase and earn it. So thanks for using that phrase. Like you said, I have deep interest in, human behavior. And I like to call myself student of human behavior, and it's not false humility or anything like that. It's a very honest realization that this is such a complex subject, and each single individual is truly infinitely complex. So I think making generalizations and predictions about people is a thing you can do with a lot of humility and caution. So I deeply believe in that. So I think those are some caveats. And the third thing actually is I truly believe, the last 2 years, what we have all gone through as individuals, as professionals, as workplaces, I don't think we have even begun to understand what it has done to us. So when you invited me for this talk, like I told you, I thank you for this invitation, because it allowed me to take a pause and just reflect. And my biggest reflection was we probably have more questions than answers. At one level, we've all been almost fooling ourselves that life is going on as usual, work is okay, because most of the businesses thankfully have recorded reasonably good numbers, and that's great. That's something to be grateful for and celebrated. But I think from there, if we jump to the conclusion that life has not changed and we are all okay, and it's the same extension of past, I think we will be fooling ourselves. So I think I start this conversation with a very honest reflection and submission that we have more questions than answers. And what we will talk about is really some of what I thought science of psychology can tell us. And there is a very favorite quote of mine which says, all models are wrong, some are useful. So it's with that belief we will look at some of the principles of psychology. And I'll talk about the first one that you mentioned. And this is really almost a universal human principle. And there are probably dozens of different theories that talk about it, that at the deepest level, the two things that we all need is, on one side, we can call it self-definition and achievement. And actually on the second side, it's about relationship and, merging with someone else or something else. So those are two deepest, strongest, and almost foundational needs all human beings have. And to be really happy and be fulfilled and productive, we need to actually fulfill both the needs. And what you will find really surprising is, when we hear them at the first surface level, we think they are contradictory, right? Self-definition means, you are differentiating yourself from others, whereas relatedness means you are merging with others. But the beauty is, to be able to relate better, you need to self-define better, and vice versa. So they actually feed into each other. And throughout our life, we actually are, building on both these needs and growing as human beings, right? And why I talked about that as we think of workplaces, right? I think, sometimes we tend to think that workplace is a very cold, clinical, rational place where we go and do work. And then there is something else where we go to become a human being, right? And that's a very, very oversimplified way to think about it. The reality is that we are the same human being, right? It's the same human being that goes to work or goes to home, or it's the same individual. And ideal workplaces and ideal employees actually find fulfillment of both these needs. And if you think about it, and I will kind of lay out this as a frame, because we will keep coming back to this, is that when we think of workplaces, we need to think of employees and the organization, and actually the employment relationship, and how all these three are changing because of the pandemic. And indeed they are changing. I'll just give you one example and then we will kind of go forward. But just look at the Great Resignation. And I know different words are being used: Great Resignation, Great Migration, Great Churn. There's something great happening. Like there's something we can
great and confusing.
What is happening, but something
great and confusing.
Absolutely right. Now, why is that happening, right? Because people are just saying that, and different people may say differently, that I've had enough, I need to change, I need to move on, right? And often people are not clear what is it that is missing. And one kind of hypothesis I want to present, and when we fill up surveys, we may say better salary, better this, better that. But what has happened is that when you went to a work, and I'm right now for a minute focusing on brick and mortar companies where people went to work, right? Even pre-pandemic, there were digital companies. So that is a small minority or different sector. So I'll kind of stay out of that. The psychological reward that you got from work actually fulfilled both your needs of relationships and your needs of self-definition or your intellectual needs, because the work fulfilled that, right? And it is my sincere belief that the digital world, the Teams call world that we are living in, has severely taken away the social psychological rewards that we got from our work. And we can do more, birthday celebrations on Zoom, but it's not the same thing. And we don't have an answer. Human beings need to feel and be in the same room as other human beings to feel something, to feel positive. I don't think there is technology that has yet come to a place where it can replace that. So just for starters, that's my reflection, that the need for relationships that workplaces fulfilled, as one-on-one relationships we have with our friends, colleagues, bosses, team members, as a community, the relationship we had with the workplace and the organization, or with the teams that we had, all of that is not the same in this digital world. And that void we don't know how to fill, honestly. So that's just for, sorry for a long answer, but we will keep drawing from this, and hence I want to talk a little bit more in detail about this.
Sure. So Shailesh, you said a bunch of things, right? So I'm going to try and sort of unpack some of the things that you said. I think your first point about, human beings, the inherent human urge is, I think, both to be yourself as well as to have a community, right? Yes. And that itself can sometimes be dichotomous. And your submission is that the workplace was actually a great way to bring both together, yes, because you had an identity through your work and your contribution. And you also had this kinship, which is a natural human urge, as an affiliation that we had. And I'm going to throw some, as a question on this one point, right? And Esther Perel, who is, the psychologist who speaks a lot and is a marriage counselor, now a relationships counselor, which, everybody who's attending, I'd love for you to check some of her work and is speaking. So she says this in the concept of relationships, and not just romantic relationships, but work relationships and friendships, that we want stability. We want to know that the person, whether it's your manager, a sibling, or a spouse, to trust you and to be there for you, but we also want them to let us free, right? So this thing about freedom yet stability, right? This thing about pushing you yet liking you for who you are.
Absolutely.
We have such inherent sort of complex emotions that we want. So are you saying that the pandemic has stripped away one side and made it unidimensional and taken away the complexity, or has it actually made it more complex and therefore people are struggling? And to add the great resignation is, people are not actually are they getting pushed out of the organization? No, they're actually going towards something in this confusion, right? So what is it? Is it a stripping away of dimension to a unidimensionality, which is what the pandemic has given us? Or is it become so complex and now we want so many things that we don't know what we want?
That's a great way to put it. And I think it's a bit of both. But before I answer that question, I want to say something else. And really building on what you said, right? That both things matter, right? And what we are not realizing is that even let's say the gap in the relationship aspect of the equation, the way it is impacting our work also. Because the quality of conversations that I think we had when we sat together on a whiteboard, right? And we could debate and, and sometimes it happens to all of us, right? That we may have a formal meeting in the morning, that meeting gets over, but in the evening, one of us has a brainwave and we call people back and say, hey, I just thought of something. Now, yeah, somebody will argue you can do the same thing on Teams, but I don't think it's the same thing, right? So not only it has stripped away or reduced the relationship component, I actually think it has impacted the quality of work, quality of conversations, quality of debates, I also think there is a absolutely serious problem of Zoom and Teams fatigue. How many of us switch off our videos when there are 15, 20 people in the room? We never could do that in a meeting room, right? And imagine we are telling ourselves, no, it's the same. 20 people used to be in the room earlier. Now 20 people are on Zoom call, right? It's not the same. And
They're
I don't
not
have an answer.
faceless in a room. They're not
I don't
faceless
have
in
an
a
answer.
room, right?
Yeah. So I think it is definitely a big impact, and we don't know. And one sad implication of this could be, and we don't know which world we are going to, is that people may actually, and sometimes when I look at developed world, I see this, people may actually stop having these expectations from workplaces. And so workplace becomes this very sterile, clinical place. And I know I'm very grossly generalizing here when I'm saying developing world and developed world. But many of us who have engaged with developed world have often felt that they're very formal at workplaces, even with their team members. Whereas in India, it's different, right? And at least I personally like the second, which is more human, more deeper connections, right? So maybe people will stop expecting that from workplaces.
I think that's a very important point that you're making from a psychological evolution of what work and workplace means to us. Are we just going to become mercenaries who are just there for a skill sets and contributing? And maybe I'm also exaggerating the point by using a word like mercenary, but really will we strip away emotion from work? And if that happens psychologically, for so many of us, work is not employment. Of course it is. We all need to earn money for a certain standard of living and for our responsibilities that we have as caregivers and for whatever material aspirations that we might have. But at its very core, it's also a form of self-expression, which is the other thing that human beings have essentially is self-expression. And what happens from a psychological impact of this change is when you're saying a very worrying and sobering thought that you don't expect relationship capital or a relationship energy from your work and your workplace, and what is that likely to do?
Yes, and mercenary is obviously, like you said, is a strong word, but I'll stop little before on that spectrum, and I'll say transactional.
Yes, right? Yes.
Workplace relationship and our relationship with workplace can potentially become very, very transactional. And don't get me wrong, even pre-pandemic world, some people have that relationship. But I think an ideal workplace, an ideal work relationship between the organization and the employee, in my mind, is one which is deep, one which is mutually beneficial, one which has at least some degree of longer time horizon, right? It's not a point in time, I give you this and you give me that kind of a transaction. Then it's a very sterile relationship, and that I hope that doesn't happen.
Let me understand this a little, because a lot of people's experience of work from home, right, has also been that the work day doesn't stop. And that's one of the other complaints that we are. But what you're saying that even, and am I understanding it right, to say even if the work day doesn't stop, your relationship quality with your work and your workplace has still shifted. And maybe that together, the fact that the grunt and the grind in a way seems more and longer,
it's a double whammy.
It's a double whammy. It's a double in as the relationship capital and your emotional connect with the company is getting reduced. Therefore it doesn't in fact seem worth it. So from a psychological perspective and bringing in the great resignation and things, one of the things that workplaces and managers, and for many of us, our managers and our bosses are a very big element of our workplace, right? Had really motivation capital. I mean, that was one of the things that as leaders and custodians we all have, is how we motivate people around us. How do you see, and clearly the fact that there is the churn that we're seeing in workplaces with great attrition, obviously the usual tools of motivation that managers and leaders had at their disposal is obviously not cutting it. We've all been in conversation to try and keep people back because we felt like, why are you going? Everything is working right, and we'll give you another great role, right? I think all of us on this call have experienced that to some level this year. What do you think fundamentally you see changing about the tool of motivation or the practice of motivation at the workplace?
again, I will kind of go to a framework which will probably help us organize our thoughts. A very simple framework. And again, this framework maybe relates to Herzberg's theory or Maslow in some ways. But I think it's important to think of motivation factors at two levels. One is the hygiene factors, and second is the motivators, right? And I think currently we are actually in a little bit of a tricky situation, and I'll explain what I mean. By hygiene factors, I mean things like clarity, inclusion, safety, right? Those are hygiene factors, right? Motivators are purpose, flow, love, relationships, right? Now, if the hygiene factors are missing or they're not at a good place, no matter how much you talk about motivators, is not going to help you, right? And I think where we are today is that, and I'm probably being a little excessively negative right now, but let's cover that side of the spectrum before we come to the other side. Because in these things, it's better to be safe than sorry. So I think it's good to honestly reflect what's happening. My worry is, what the pandemic has done and what this changed situation has done is that it has really impacted a lot of people very severely on the hygiene factors. Do I belong? Do I have clarity on what we are doing, why we are doing, right? See, one of the biggest things, and often I feel that as you go to, more and more junior people in the teams, one leader I was speaking to used a very nice metaphor. He was saying, you visualize, bigger gear wheels and smaller gear wheels. So he said for a bigger gear wheel, it could be a movement of 1 degree, but a smaller wheel is going like 10 times, right? So his point was a senior person may make a small decision, but the implication for the person on the ground is sometimes 100 times more. Now, in a earlier setup, the social communication, otherwise the conversation that happened, many things that happened would tell you what's going on. And what's going on in the workplace, you did not ever pick up only from the email that you got. In fact, many of us don't even read those emails. You get it from that water cooler conversation, that commute on the way back where you travel with your colleague. Now that's gone, right? So I am sitting, and I'm again kind of exaggerating, but imagine if I was not co-located at my head office or my main office, I'm sitting in some village somewhere or some remote place. My connection with my workplace is my laptop and my mobile phone. And the things that keep coming to me. Now that doesn't give me a feeling of inclusion, connection, certainty. See, certainty and clarity are hugely important hygiene needs. And now look at it, while I am, let's say, struggling with these, if a leader starts talking about purpose and meaning and flow, I'm going to say, boss, what are we talking about? It's again a double whammy that I'm here struggling with some basic stuff. I don't know why I do this Excel sheet every day. Nobody has told me, right? And you're talking of meaning and purpose. I can't connect, right? So don't get me wrong. I value the conversation about purpose and meaning. It's deeply important, and that's the positive side of the post-pandemic world, that organizations and people are thinking deeply about it. But we need to do that with this very humble understanding that to engage with questions of purpose and meaning is a privilege available to people who have sorted their hygiene factors. And if you don't respect that, it's a problem, right? So I think the way I would encourage people to think of is, am I first fully taking care of the base factors that my team needs of clarity, inclusion, safety, certainty, that next 1 month, this is what we'll do. And I understand, we are all discussing Omicron, so certainty today, nobody
is a luxury, is a real luxury.
Nobody can give, right? So that's just the world we live in. So
no, understand. I think that's a very useful way to look at sort of why powers of motivation don't seem to work as well. I think that's a really useful framework to say, hey, how are you going to motivate at elevated levels when actually it is hygiene is not met, and then actually the only quantifiable hygiene factor then seems to be about compensation and money, and that's what is becoming the tool largely for people to have these conversations, which is further making your transactional point. So
Exactly.
it's all a cauldron, right? I'm
Exactly.
going to take some, as we're finishing off this theme, I'm going to take some questions that have come from the audience, and a couple which are actually really good for our next segment, which I'll
Sure.
keep for that. I think a lot of this psychological impact that we are creating, and a lot of push and pull and dilemmas in people's minds, in organizations' mind. The question from Dr. Farida Virani, who's a professor of HR and behavioral sciences, that as what is happening on creating a position at the CXO level for mental wellness in organizations, because this kind of psychological churn that you and I have spent the last 15 minutes discussing, which is a
Sure.
live problem and it's true. Is it time for large companies to have a CXO on mental health, mental wellness?
Great question.
Great idea,
I
actually. Brilliant.
have a two-part answer. Firstly, I'll respond to the and I completely and respect the importance of the space of mental health. So I think I will come to that in a minute. However, I'm little circumspect about people creating new roles like this, because I have often seen creation of new roles like this actually does more harm than good. We have had people saying chief happiness officer, and don't get me wrong, I respect all these areas of work. Even chief diversity officer, chief this officer. Sometimes just creation of position sends the signal that it's not everybody's job. I actually think something like mental well-being is everybody's job, and whether an organization chooses to create a role or not is a secondary point. But one very positive change I see, particularly in India in last 2 years, is our at least beginning of our willingness to engage with question of mental health. And we can start from someone like Deepika Padukone talking openly, I think a couple of years ago, about her struggles. To today, there are many business leaders who have talked about it, and most companies are providing some kind of counseling helplines, education programs. So I think it's a very welcome beginning. Only today on LinkedIn, I saw a very amazing post, and I was very happy to see it. I think it's about I forget the hashtag, but it's about basically this is the pill I take every day for my psychological well-being. It's basically people who are on medication for mental health issues accepting that yes, this pill helps me. And I think it's an amazing thing, and many people are responding to that post saying yes, I have also, when required, when my therapist prescribed, taken medication, and I'm very, with my open heart, I'm acknowledging it, and I have no guilt or shame in doing that. That's a positive change, right? Because and that post says, and I completely agree, that if you're a diabetic, you take a medication, right? Yeah. We don't have stigma around that. Why should a person who needs medication for mental health at a point in time or at any point in time not have a same kind of treatment? So I think my short answer is there is definitely a beginning about acknowledging importance of mental health in the corporate world in India. And most organizations that are most large organizations are providing resources and access to counseling helplines, etc., to individuals. It's a beginning. I'm not saying that's
it's a beginning.
It's a very positive beginning.
But you don't believe that necessarily in a role that it has to actually be broad-based, more useful, like on diversity, like on inclusion, like on cognitive diversity. Everybody should be practicing it. But I think the professor's point is interesting, because sometimes large companies need to also make symbolic gestures, and a chief and but you're also right to say that chief happiness officer, things like that sound very gimmicky, because it almost reduces it. It's very reductionist, and that one person can be responsible for it. Everybody has to, but I think the markers of the evolution, and I think maybe that's the one psychological benefit maybe of this universal feelings that we've all gone through as a world, is forcing these conversations. And like somebody I was speaking to said, hey, it's not like first work used to enter homes because people will bring work back. Now life has entered the workplace, and talent custodians and leaders have to deal with people's lives. And I think Therefore, maybe some organizations might be nice to have a CXO, but I think it is everyone's responsibility and broad basic it. I'm going to jump right, we're already at 4:30 and we have 2 more themes to cover. But I'm going to jump to the next theme, and a lot of audience questions are already around that theme. And, what Tojo Jose is asking, as well as what Swapna Banerjee is asking, right? There's a nice questions to set us up for the next conversation around the impact on power structures, right? So, for example,
Yes.
what Tojo is asking, how do the new forms of informal leadership under hybrid work impact organizational culture? And Swapna's conversation is around the socio-economic impact of hybrid, right? Let me begin by asking you, sort of, from an extracted point of view, have power structures between managers and their direct subordinates changed or not? Have power structures between the company and the employee changed? And what has happened to power structures employee to employee because of a variety of hybrid options and things like that? There are 3 kinds of power structures at play here, right?
Sure. No, thanks again. And I think the mention of socioeconomic, that phrase again reminded me that, and I think I just want to call that out, that the fact that we are all speaking here on a Zoom call and having a conversation is again a privilege.
In English.
Right? Because we know that there are many, lakhs of our fellow Indian citizens who, when lockdowns happened, and these conversations are Greek and Latin and irrelevant for them, right? Because when it's about tomorrow's meal, none of this matters. So I think we need to be very, very conscious that the conversation that we are having in the world that we live in, professionals like us, is a small minority and a privileged minority. I think the more we understand that and accept that, it's important. So thanks for reminding us just by using that phrase. Power structures, I think, and again, I'll talk a little bit about Indian context, are definitely going to change. And again, I'm going to make some broad generalizations here. I think if I look at typical Indian mindset of how an average Indian has looked at employment and organizations, right? It has always been, and maybe it comes from our agrarian past or wherever it comes from, is that the organization has been this big, godlike entity that provides me, and I'm grateful, right? And maybe if you go a few decades ago, people thought of employment for a lifetime. Fair enough. Today, people don't think of that. Today, they think of, the organization provides me growth, and, I need to fulfill, I need to give more back than what I get so that I get to grow, right? That has been the mindset. So I think there has been this very unequal kind of a relationship between the employer and the employee, by and large. And there'll be a lot of exceptions, but I think, and I had a chance to chat with, 5, I happened to meet, 5 young people who are IT professionals, and they were telling me about how companies are chasing them right now. And it was refreshing because the degree of, choice they have today, and they just know that. And for me, it was, and I'm not, I'm not very old, I'm only 46. But if I think of the time when I started my career 20 years ago, nobody had that kind of a mindset, right? That I am in the buyer's seat and I will decide. There are these 4 companies chasing me. I will see who, puts the most valuable proposition on the table. So I think what pandemic has done and the post-pandemic world has done is because of this, location has become irrelevant, right? So the number of choices every individual now has, again, for many jobs and many professions, is just much higher, right? And because of the great resignation or because of the churn, organizations are, you talk to any hiring leader, people are scrambling to hire. Roles are vacant, there is growth happening, but there aren't people. You talk to literally a SME or a Fortune 500 company, they're saying, I don't have enough people and I'm struggling to get good people. So it has suddenly become a market of talent, and the power equation has completely changed between the employee and the organization. If you look at manager and the employee, and again, To make this example a little more specific, I'll give a brick and mortar example. Right? Let's say you were a manager in a brick and mortar company, pre-pandemic world, and many organizations in India were there. Right? When a meeting meant 10 people physically walked into a room, they didn't even have a subscription to Zoom or Teams or even a dial-in facility, because people traveled and entered a room to have a meeting. Right? Many companies were there just 2 years ago. Right? Now, if I'm a manager who is, kind of used to a team around me and I can call anybody anytime and have a conversation or give work, today it's gone, right? I have to check if my team member is available. Is it a good time to talk? These are small things, but I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing in a way, right? So I think it was high time that the Indian hierarchical mindset of, manager and employer being somebody with all the power, and employee being the, not powerless, but the entity with the less power is changing. It's getting into a more collegial, more relationship of equality, and where the employees are turning back and asking, okay, so how are you adding value? Remuneration is a given, but tell me what else. Are you helping me grow? Are you respectful of my other interests in life? Are you respectful of my work-life balance? People didn't dare ask some of these questions 20 years ago, right? Today they are,
or even 10 years ago, or even 7 years ago.
Today these are great conversations.
But tell me, and we'll come to the employee to employee part later. But on the manager part, if I was to double click a little bit, what does this do to work output? Because the dharma of a company is to create something to do. There is an organizational destiny or organizational accountability that companies have. What happens to accountability structures on work output, and how does one then maintain a fluid but firm, right? Not rigid, but fluid but firm chain of accountability and not power structures, so that the work gets done?
Sure. So I have a sincere hope actually on this account, which the pandemic can help us deliver. And I'm not the one to paint a picture saying, post-pandemic world was a paradise and pre-pandemic world was a paradise and post-pandemic is a hell. That's not at all my, kind of position.
Or the converse, that everything is good. Every change is good.
Yeah, it's mixed bag, right? And
yeah.
One hope that I have about the post-pandemic world, and I think we are going through the churn right now. So we have not yet come out of this, right? We'll come out of this probably, I don't know, 1 or 2 years later, hopefully, if this stops. Otherwise, I don't know what out of it means. My hope is, we will substantially reduce the noise in the workplace. What I mean is, and those of us who have read the Netflix book, will remember that as organizations grow, a lot of unproductive rituals, processes, formats keep getting added, right? And I actually feel that a lot of stress and pain that employees feel is not actually coming from work. It comes from this, noise is the only way I can describe it. I think what the post-pandemic world will do, and we are in the middle of it. See, right now we are still following those rituals because we are used to doing them in the pre-pandemic world. So we now do them on Microsoft Teams, right? Just this simple question about who all needs to be there in this meeting. Why can't we have a pre-read sent and everybody respond on email? There are organizations that are actually doing that, right? That because meetings are one of the worst energy drainers and confusion creators in this whole universe. No, we have not questioned that. Actually, the pandemic has given us a chance to question that. We have not done enough of it. But my hope is that this pushback from employees and the value that we are ourselves actually discovering of our finite amount of energy will make us more sharper and more ruthless about cutting the noise. And hence what will remain actually is the meaningful work. And that is very easy for any competent manager and employee to have a conversation on, that I asked you to deliver this, have you done it or not? And if not, why? That doesn't need any technology. It's the basic managerial ability and a responsible employee conversation.
No, understand. I think what you're saying is that is this, low noise, high signal workplace,
yes.
right? and low clutter, high clarity workplace. So that you remove, and then using, if the conversation, this season's theme at Thrive Talks is about getting real about hybrid, then maybe the hybrid is using. And I agree with you. I think it's also a skill issue in terms of asynchronous communication. Most meetings could have been an email, but the effort, because most people don't have the skills of writing, they find it easier to have a loose conversation with 40 people listening, where actually the one to few and one to many, the written word is a great amplifier of the one to few and one to written, one to many, right? And which ones are we using? So I think that I like that thinking about the the low clutter, high clarity, low noise, high signal, and low wastage and high output workplace, right?
And I'm forgetting the name of this business leader, but he's CEO of this company called as Basecamp.
No.
So if
Jason
anyone wants to,
Fry.
That's correct. So if anyone is curious, there are some amazing books he has written and a couple of amazing YouTube talks where he talks about this.
Get real about work. Get real about work is what Jason Fry's column used to be at Inc. And he's fantastic on some of these things about workplaces, and Basecamp has a very interesting philosophy. Let's talk a little bit about, before we move to the next theme, a little bit about this employee to employee power dynamic, especially as now companies are getting more and more hybrid, about some teams coming in 3 days a week, some roles becoming completely on site, some becoming completely remote, and so on and so forth. How does the influence and power structure from peer to peer evolve in this?
I think, and again, as I keep thinking about how the virtual world has impacted us, workplaces, this one actually we have not fully understood, honestly. For example, if I join a team, let's say you are my manager and we have 10-member team and all of us report to you, I still get to connect with my other 9 colleagues and you, and let's say your boss, because there is a chain of command, right? That happens. What I don't get to do now is meet my peers in the other teams, which is a huge part of my induction, my work, my understanding of the workplace, right? Those relationships, those connections, those conversations now there is actually no formal method unless you curate something, because either there is this or there is all hands meeting where there are 100 videos switched off on a Zoom call and somebody talking, right? There is nothing in between.
There's orchestrated serendipity, I call it. As talent custodians, how do we orchestrate serendipities for these peer-to-peer influence relationships, right?
Is not there, right? And I think the point that you kind of in a way referenced, which is, and it creates very unique challenges about fairness and equity. Fairness and equity is another hygiene factor. If I don't feel I get a fair deal, I don't feel good about the workplace, right? Now, what the post-pandemic world has done, and I think this is the biggest challenge we all have as managers and as HR professionals, is what is fair and equitable now? Just you take, the let's say work configuration, right? If I live in the same city as my offices and you call me to the office, right, twice a week, but let's say my colleague in your team who is currently working from a different city can work from home. How does that work? And if you say to that person that you also come to this city, he or she will say, I don't know whether Omicron is going, I don't know. We don't know, right? So there are, every individual can think, that am I getting the right and fair and equitable treatment or not? And on that front, I think we are in a very complex world with no simple answers. I really don't know what's the simple answer to this question.
You've set us up, and then I'll take all the audience questions that I'm trying to involve them in and take it at the end. But theme 3, because you talked about the fair and equitable, and we only have 15 minutes odd left, right? As I figured this conversation will go like this, because there's so many things to talk about. But this fair and equitable, and I think that's what we are living through, especially for HR professionals, right? Like, I feel like we're living through a standardization, to your point about fair and equitable policies. There was a standardization of HR policies, and what the demand now seems to be is personalization of HR policies, either because of business needs, because some teams, business has said these are on-site roles, these are, work from anywhere roles, these are hybrid roles, or employee-induced personalization because they're making these choices to say, I want to come in once a week or 3 times a week or 4 times a week. I want to work from whatever. I think, I don't think we're appreciating enough how massive a pivot and shift this is. And here I'm going to ask you from a experience as being a HR business partner in large complex companies, and now at the Godrej Group, right, which has such a diversified group, right, with so many people. How do you navigate this standardized policy which actually brought everyone together and was the cohesive glue to this personalization? What is it going to do to fairness, equity, and more importantly to cohesiveness and a sense of uniform connection to the employer?
At the Godrej Group, we have a kind of body of leaders called as HRLT, which is the HR leadership team, which comes together and we kind of debate and discuss these things. What actually helps, is our absolutely fundamental belief in our core values. Because we believe that, whether it's about fairness, whether it's about transparency, whether it's about respect to people, whether it's about understanding their individual needs, those values for Godrej are very, very core, right? Now, how we implement and operationalize those values changes from sectors to sector and industry to industry, right? I'll make a general principle and then I'll come to the Godrej context. Actually, a few years ago, I forget the name of the author, but somebody from Accenture wrote a book called as Workforce of One. And said that eventually we'll go to a place where each individual will be treated, like a unique employee. And by force, we are, I think, going there. Right? So I think the interesting challenge we have, and I think it's a big opportunity, is, earlier, if the default way of work meant you work 9 to 5 in a physical office as a permanent employee for 20 years, that was a default, right?
Yeah.
Now, none of those variables are a given. You may not work 9 to 5. You may not work in the office. You may not be a permanent employee. You may not even be in my city, right? And I think that's a positive because it creates, a whole spectrum of opportunities and configuration, right? So I think we as HR professionals need to respond to that and create, I would say, almost personas or different clusters, right? So that's kind of one theme which takes us to very diverse approaches, but at the same time, have a coherent employee value proposition as an organization. That whether you are a part-time employee or a consultant or a permanent employee or a CEO or a workman, you will still experience what being in Godrej means. And I think that has to come down to your core philosophies and core values. And the biggest thing we have learned actually is that because we are in the evolving situation, the only thing you can do is you can communicate and say, this is what we have decided till this point in time. And this is the rationale behind it. And we will review this decision after 2 months when the situation changes. And people respond to this fantastically. If people have faith in you as a fair and caring organization that they know stands by them, people are willing to give actually much more back. And at Godrej, because, we, and I'm not just saying this because I work for this organization, we have truly stood by our people, not just in this pandemic, but even otherwise. And our people have stood by us. So it's not a transactional relationship. It's a long-term mutual relationship of trust and respect.
And have you not experienced this because of every 2 months, and I think you're right, people have responded well because everybody understands this is a unique situation and even employers are human beings living through the same churn, right? And so are managers. But has there been any instances or some teams that, this feeling of, hey, this might not be fair? I think manufacturing, there's a question that came up manufacturing last week in 5 Talks. We were speaking to someone from retail, right? Where most 90% of the staff is storefront staff who had to go back to work, even before vaccines and all last June and July, as opposed to the corporate headquarters staff that is still working from home. I think for manufacturing, for large diversified groups, there are some functions which have never not been at work, right, or in office essentially. Has that been difficult to manage to explain to different sets that this is what is needed?
So it's a great question, and I'll give you an example actually from the pre-pandemic times, and which will explain my point about values and principles. In the pre-pandemic world, when we, some of our city-based roles moved to 5 days a week, okay, we actually started thinking that how can we offer this as a facility or a choice to all our employees. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying even then it was easy to do it for everybody, or we did it for everybody. But the thought was that we need to be equitable as much as possible. That if a person in a big city gets a 5 days week, can a person on the shop floor also, again, there are constraints of capacities, manufacturing schedules, but can they get it? So that thinking had happened even then. In current post-pandemic world, there is no easy answer, because not all the roles are amenable to work from home, and some roles are necessarily work from site. So we don't have a simple answer of, how can we create a quote unquote equity across this spectrum. But I think the quest continues.
So you are in a way admitting that there are sometimes misgivings or apprehensions, right? And I think that the difference between equity and equality are very different words. So it's not like you can have equal policies. Is it equitable for some role? And I think to realize that there'll be natural human impulses of feeling unfair, and that's a big thing for us as we're going to. And within teams, I mean, Harappa, for example, is a small company where you're 170, 200 people, but that some managers are okay with people coming in. Some managers are enforcing our 3-2 rule with greater discipline. Some are saying it's okay, and that's creating within teams, right? Somebody saying, hey, if that team gets to work like this, people will come up with these, and we have to have a response.
And Shreyasi, I have a bigger point actually. The bigger point is, are we having these conversations? See, the issues become bigger when people feel that they can't talk about this. And I think this is where cultures and managers have a big. What we like to say is that, we can agree to disagree, but don't ever think that you can't raise a question. We may not have answers, but let's talk.
Yeah.
And in one of the debates when we were having this conversation, the senior leader actually said, okay, you think this person in big city, gets 5 days, but he or she also works till 9 in the night, whereas you finish your factory and you go back home. So it sometimes grass is on the other side phenomenon also. Yeah. What is important is we have conversations.
I think that's a really good point, that all of this is messy and everything is messy, and we're in the process of discovery to find the right balance on so many of these things. The really important thing is to keep the conversation going and to raise the concerns you have and the misapprehensions, and for employees and managers to listen keenly to what people are thinking.
And be a partner in solving the problems. So what we encourage is, at any level, actually, employees shouldn't take this stance that, I'm asking this of the organization, and organization should not provide it to me. We always tell people that we are the organization, right? Yeah. So, okay, this is a problem. How can we solve it? What are your ideas, right? I also have a responsibility if I'm a senior person, but you also have a responsibility, right? And that hopefully gets us to better places. So.
To your questions, Paul, I always say that, listen, I might not have I mostly never have the answers, but what I love is a tough question, right? Yes, so please never hold back from a tough question. If I can answer it, I'll answer it. If I can't, I can't. And help me discover the answer. Right? I think that's a really good point. In the last, we have last 5 or 6 minutes left. I'm going to take 2 questions that is also coming in from the audience, right? Somebody, I think from Dipanjan from Mahindra Finance, for example, is asking. And so the other question also that has come in is around training, right? What does L&D do? What is the role of L&D now in all of, from whether psychology, organizational policies, power structure, different ways of working? What can L&D do to help this? And how can HR enable better relationships through skilling and training, right?
I think as it is true for almost every area of HR, I think L&D also will undergo a huge change. And again, like I said, I definitely don't have all the answers, but I have some loud thoughts which I can share. I think, like I said, what has happened as a first reaction to pandemic is, let's say all the learning libraries were offered to people. That happened. And then people started doing workshops virtually, right? So the same workshop that I did earlier in person, I now do it virtually. And that's natural. You kind of move to that place. But I think place where we may go, and again, those are some of the positive changes, right? Is the virtual workplace and the digital kind of technologies hopefully will get us to a place where learning can be far more personalized and learning can be far more just in time, right? And I think it will be the next kind of mission for all the L&D professionals to create a learning ecosystem, which is because I think, and this was there again in the pre-pandemic world also, that learning is not only a classroom workshop, right? Learning is many other things also. But I think pandemic has anyway made classroom workshops almost impossible. Forget last 2-3 months where they have started again. So now what do we do, right? And now what do we do can have many answers, right? Are we leveraging some of the apps that are available? Are we leveraging peer learning? Are we leveraging, more digital resources? And I think the next wave of L&D work is really about creating those efficient and effective L&D ecosystems.
Yeah.
That would be my very high level answer. And we are all actually applying ourselves to that question as we speak.
There's Harappa, of course, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But
absolutely.
That shameless plug aside.
No,
but,
I think it's...
my point is, our company is walking the talk on this, right? And here, as a learning provider who's constantly pitching to industry and companies, we do have a perspective and an experience of the conversations on learning that are happening right now, right? And while people, teams, ways of working, ways of collaboration, decision making, everything is changing so much, it would naturally, as the audience questions also coming in, there has to be more learning. Now it has to be across, I completely agree with you, across many formats, understanding people's different needs, preferences, how different learning works. Have learning budgets increased, right? Has experimentation in learning increased? Or are people still believing that the only way that you can learn is in a classroom, and people are still, because I have to tell you, given our experience of 200, 300 conversations this year with learning custodians, right? I'm sometimes often disheartened that when actually the workforces are going through so much, sometimes L&D is a place where could be a budget cut, could be deprioritized in top leadership's mind, because it is a tough thing to do and a tough thing to show ROI on, right? As people, so what, our organization is really walking the talk and understanding the learning crisis that's coming up if people are not skilled in time for some of these massive shifts.
2-3 thoughts. One is, most of the progressive organizations that I have had the privilege of being part of, and I think that I know of, would not touch, quote unquote L&D budget. They are quite focused and sincere about those investments, and there is no doubt that that investment is valuable. So I don't think in most progressive organizations that's an issue. The issue is not about budgets, actually. The issue is about effectiveness. And how are we as L&D professionals ensuring that every rupee that is spent on L&D, there is ROI? That is the question. And again, I also don't have all the answers to that question. So I don't think we need more budgets. We need different thinking. We need maybe more individualization, more better diagnostic before we do an intervention. I think those kinds of things need to change. I don't think budget is what is coming in our way. In fact, I sometimes...
So better learning design rather
sharper,
than less learning.
Targeted, focused, well thought through. That's the shift that is needed.
Great.
That's
Thank you.
My reflection. Yeah.
No, and I think that's a reflection for all of us who are learning, creators, is really to keep in pace with the needs. And I keep saying learning is not easy. There is cognitive effort, both to unlearn and to learn. And how do you make it possible with all the limitations and constraints that people have from a capacity, time, attention, energy perspective.
Absolutely.
How do we sort of tap into moments of learning? It doesn't have to be long, it has to be profound, right? So I think there are lots of questions on learning, and maybe that's time for another conversation. But we're right on the dot at 5. Shailesh, thank you so much for that wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed having you on Thrive Talk. And everybody, thank you so much for joining us. The conversation will be on YouTube, as well as, you can watch it later if you want to. We'll send you links. Thank you, everybody, again. Thanks, Shailesh.
Thank you so
much. Have a great
much.
evening.
All the very best. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.